Five Rings Podcast, your weekly amateur sports and Olympic sports show with Dwayne Rollins and Kevin Laramie. And now, without further ado, here's Dwayne Rollins.
And welcome to the Five Rings Podcast. I am Dwayne Rollins along with Kevin Laramie. You may notice a slight change in the sound quality today because I have to do this on my iPhone. That has to do with some issues that we've been having, ongoing issues we've been having with Skype and how it works with my laptop. It suddenly came onto us, and it's baffling us to try and get this fixed. But we have some technical people that are going to look at it tomorrow, and hopefully we can get back up with our full level of sound. Well, I don't think Kevin does a good job producing this, so I don't think it's too bad. The other piece of housekeeping before we get going, I'll let Kevin talk about that, is our feeds are a little bit screwy right now, and that has nothing to do with us, right, Kevin?
Absolutely nothing. 2 days ago, I was somebody told me on Twitter that something wrong with our iTunes feeds. I look on the actual feeds themselves to realize they're all disappeared, and that's across the board, all the shows that we produce. And it's not just us. There's thousands and thousands of podcasts right now that are down. It's something to do with rapid feeds and their upgrade. They're doing something went wrong. We're trying to get answers and establish time till, well, it'll be fixed for now. There's no other update then. You can get all our shows, all the things that we produce on kevinlaramie.com, all the soccer shows on Canadian Soccer News, USRradio.com, FiveRingsPodcast.com, on all their respective YouTube channel as well. And in the meantime, tonight I will create a temporary backup RSS feed with all the shows that we produce. So if you really want to download them and be able to listen to them when you're offline or when you're alone in the woods somewhere far and you want to listen to our beautiful voice as well, I will create a temporary way for everyone to do that tonight.
All right, that's a lot of work, so we thank Kevin for that, but we're working on that side of things. Quickly, as an intro into today's podcast, we are going to preview the Pan American Games, which start, Kevin, tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it. I'm very excited about it, as anyone can imagine that's listened to this show. So we are going to go with our normal format of gold, silver, bronze, and wood, which for those that are new to this means our most, our second most, and our third most positive moment. And in this particular case, we're talking about things we're looking forward to. And the wood is the thing that we're negative about the final day, and in this case, it's what we're not looking forward to involving the Pan Am Games. That's going to be in the segment right after this. After that, we are going to wrap up the Women's World Cup. It's been a bit of a delay and a bit of a mess trying to get that out there. So, American listeners, you're going to get us to eat our humble pie today. The U.S., of course, beats Japan 5-2 in the final of that tournament, and we will wrap it up and talk about the legacy and all sorts of good things about that. And then in our final segment, we're going to do a little Kevin Talk cycling. The Tour de France has, of course, started, and we'll talk a little tennis. Wimbledon, some nice runs by a Canadian and Vasco Papasol, and big matches between the Williams sisters, some crazy stuff going on. The top seeds are up there and flying high, so we'll talk a little tennis. We haven't done that all that much this year. Whew, that's a lot, Kevin.
Let's take a break, catch our breath, and come back and talk about the Pan Am Games.
And welcome back to the Five Rings Podcast, the Pan American Games. Seems like we've been talking about them. Well, we've been talking about them almost since the beginning of this show. The very beginning, we were, of course, talking about Sochi. But I think that maybe if you look back at the very, second show we did, the first main regular Five Rings podcast that happened after the Winter Olympics, we likely spoke about the Pan American Games, which, of course, taking place in my backyard here in Toronto. So, yeah, it's very exciting to have them a day away.
No, absolutely. And if you go back to the history of the show, we had Teddy Katz, sports person for the Pan American Games on the show a couple of times to talk about the games and all that, so we can go back in the history of the show and listen to those shows. And I'm looking forward to the beginning of the game. But Dwayne, I feel some anticipation from Toronto.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, people on Twitter, journalists, everybody's already putting down the games. Already saying, oh, there's a lack of support. People already hasn't come. I think people are waiting for the opening gun, and then they might flock in.
Yeah, is that your wood metal, Kevin?
Yes. The people are they're ready to bash those games. It's like they're waiting for it. and that they're ready to bash it. If you look at all the newspaper columnists in the Toronto area right now, they're already saying, "Oh, it's a failure. There's a lack of purchase of tickets, lack of attendance. Hasn't started yet. Give it a break. Give it a chance." And that would be my would medal. The certain lack of buzz, certain lack of anticipation, and the trendy bashing of those games now.
Yeah, look, and we've talked about this, and it's a major pet peeve of mine. This could easily be my wood medal as well. And in fact, my wood medal is going to be similar, but not quite. It's going to be a little more detailed, a little more Toronto-centric, so bear with me, international listeners. But it's infuriating because at this point in time, look, everyone has a right to oppose the hosting of these games. I'm not saying otherwise, and I think we've been pretty clear, even though that we are pro multi-games and we do enjoy them and we do back them and think there is value in hosting them. We also, I think, are pretty fair in our evaluation of whether the bids need to be dealt with individually, and we need to look at them for their own merits, and not every bid is right for every city. I think we're pretty clear with that. So I'm not saying that people are wrong to question hosting the Pan Am Games, but I am saying that now that they're a day away, I don't understand what the value is in continuing to bash them. At this point in time, if you bash the games that have already happened, you're not changing anything. It's not like, your great column is going to make, oh, you know what, you're right, we're going to pull the games down and give all the money back. Like, it's done. So here we are at a point where you have two choices. You can either sit at home and be miserable about them and just be a miserable SOB and just try and bash everything and just rain on everyone's parade, or you can go, okay, they're here, let's see what I can get out of them and get the most value out of them. And that's what, speaking as a Torontonian now, I think those Torontonians that opposed the games need to now realize they're here and try and figure out what value they can take from that. Whether that means that they go and watch one of the concerts, then that's great, and they should do that. Maybe that means they go and experience the art displays. That's great. They should do that. Maybe it means that they buy tickets for something. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe it means that they take advantage of the venues, the facilities after the games are over. Maybe it just means that down the line you take advantage of the transit improvements that have occurred. They haven't been as great as I would have liked, the transit improvements, but they are. The Pearson Link is there. It hasn't been before. It's there now. It's open now. It is more convenient to get to the airport here because of these games. You can argue, of course, that we should have done them without the games, but we didn't. So now that they're here, I think it is imperative for anyone to go out and try and figure out what it is that they can gain and that they can benefit from these games, because we've already spent the money. We ain't not going to spend it if you bitch about it anymore, right?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. My bronze medal is very specific, and it's the HOV lanes, the high occupancy vehicle lanes. Everyone's moaning about them. It's this great tragedy that these people that are driving from Oakville into Toronto every day are being delayed by 20 minutes because they insist on driving one person in their vehicle along with 700,000 other people, thus causing congestion. Let me let you in a little hint, people. Most cities in the world have HOV lanes, and they should have HOV lanes here. Get over it. I have no sympathy for you individual drivers that are clogging up the highways and should be carpooling or taking transit anyway. That may be my urban pinko philosophy coming out, but that's where I come from there. And now I don't want to be angry anymore, so let's talk positives, Kevin.
Absolutely.
Ooh. All right, we'll go start with my bronze medal, what I'm looking forward to. And that is, for lack of a better way to put it, and I say this with the utmost respect, and anyone who knows this show knows that I mean that, the weird sports, the sports that I don't get to see every day, the sports that are now going to be in my backyard. You know what I have tickets for this week, Kevin?
What?
Handball.
Nice.
I have tickets for handball, and I'm going to get tickets for wakeboarding, and I'm going to get tickets for one of the combat sports. I'm very excited with this. I have a budget set aside. I'm waiting for the games to start to see whether there might be some reduced ticket prices that I can take advantage of, but I'm hoping to get out to about 4 or 5 events a week, and I'm going to focus those events on mostly sports that I don't get to see day in, day out. I will go to see a soccer game. I'm a soccer guy, and I think that I will enjoy watching those on its own accord. But, I'm going to watch Canada's national team play on next Wednesday in the Gold Cup. I watched the women play in a World Cup less than a month ago. I've watched the Canadian national soccer teams play close to 100 times now in my life, so it's not special, right? It's not unique. watching handball is going to be unique. I'm also watching beach volleyball next week. Those are the 2 tickets that they have purchased so far for the first week. I'm continuing to just monitor and look, as I said. But it's just being exposed to new things. And who knows, maybe I will discover something that I will fall in love with and I will become obsessed with. And maybe next year at this time, you'll be listening to the 43rd edition of the Kevin and Dwayne Talk Handball podcast. We just don't know, and that's what excites me.
Sure, another show. Why not? Why not? My Browns moment that I'm looking forward to is, you mentioned combat sports. What's more specific, it's karate. I can't wait to see karate, full contact karate in those games. It's a combat sport that you don't see at the Olympic level. You might see eventually. It's in the running, as we could say. But I can't wait to watch the Pan Am Karate competition. And my silver moment that I'm looking for is to see Valérie Martin compete in the inline skating in the summer game instead of the short track speed skating in the winter games. It's going to be interesting to see her transition, to see the similarities. Other athletes are doing the same as she does. So it will be interesting to see only the summer athlete in that discipline versus the ones that are coming over from the short track. It's going to be very interesting and very different type of story you'll get in that game, in that discipline, than other ones.
Yeah, that's certainly a storyline that you're going to see on the coverage of the games. For those who don't know, real quickly, the coverage here in Canada was announced last week. It's from 3 to 5 daily. There will be a 2-hour show that will will sort of focus in on one sport in the afternoon. There's a show from 8 to 10 in the evening, and then there's a wrap-up show at 11 till midnight. So there's a fairly significant amount of coverage on CBC. It's all on CBC. But more to the point, and more to how Kevin and I will probably absorb these games when we're not actually physically out there, is that there's 750 hours of coverage available online on the cbc.ca/Pan Am's site. So lots of opportunity to do that. You mentioned, it's interesting, Kevin, you mentioned 2 sports that aren't on the Olympic platform. And I think that kind of speaks to what I said a minute ago, too, is that's one of the great things about these games is just that opportunity to see these new sports and see sports you're not exposed to that are you're not even supposed to be at the Olympic Games. So these are niche of niche, right?
Yeah. Absolutely, and it is one of the only chances you get to see them. It's at the Pan Am level, or sometimes the Commonwealth, depends what games, but with disciplines like netball. But yeah, it's different. It has a different feel to it, and it gives me a different feeling as a watcher, listener, a viewer, and it's something that it's worth it.
And I wonder what this year's what the Pan Am's version of netball is going to be for us, Kevin. Because even as much as I love all sports, there will be a sport that I look at and go, I don't get it.
Why?
I wonder what.
Why?
I don't get it. But all the love the netball, folks. I respect you. I just don't get you. My silver medalist. It's a very specific game within the field hockey tournament. And field hockey is down at UT, so it's a great central location here in Toronto as well. And I was actually at one facility, one new facility that I've experienced already, and that is a very nice little field that they've built. It's going to get a lot of post-game use down there. The field hockey at the UT. It's also the host of the Parapans soccer tournament. Anyway, moving from that. The specific game I am targeting is Argentina beat Canada in the men's field hockey tournament. This is a massive rivalry that no one knows about. These 2 club teams are the best 2 field hockey teams in the Americas. Now, that's a weak region, so it's not like they're going to compete for gold medals at the Olympics. But to these 2 programs, their gold medal is making the Olympics, right? And that game goes a long way and pretty much is the way that they do that. So that is one of the most intense and amazing experiences that's going to be happening here in my backyard. A great advantage for the Toronto team. There's a lot of Torontonians on it because Torontonians and Vancouverites, because of the South Asian love of field hockey. There's a huge South Asian sort of influence on the Canadian team, and a lot of them come from either Toronto or from Vancouver. So to play in their own backyard for the chance to go to the Olympics, that's something that I think everyone needs to go out and watch if they can. And I absolutely am marking that one on my calendar as my silver medal looking forward to experience. And that makes me then go to my gold medal experience, Kevin. And I think maybe you can kind of guess. I think most people that know me and have listened to this show can guess to what my gold medal would be. Do you have any ideas, Kevin?
There's no curling, though.
Oh, there is no curling. No. You know that I love the sprints. And I wrote a column on Canada'sPlan.com
talking about the importance of having Canada back in the sprint game. Andre Degrasse, the amazingly talented young sprinter that has burst onto the scene, running sub-10s, sub-20s. It's 20.58, I believe, was his time in the 200, which is just astounding to me. Anyone who knows the 200 meters can just understand how crazy that is. 19.72 was the world record in the 200 meter for like 20 years. So to run under that time, it was wind aided, but barely. So, let's not get too caught up in that. It's just an amazing thing. And I cannot wait to see this young guy fulfill his promise and absolutely become the face of Rio for this country. And hopefully the pressure won't get to him, but I think that any great sprinter thrives on pressure, and hopefully this guy is the real deal. And we're going to find out, because the pressure already is there. This is an example of why the Pan Am Games are so important, because as much as they are a secondary event, and no one is denying that, for him to come off of his great sub-10, sub-20 times and immediately go to doing the Pan Am Games in his hometown is that pressure. And if he can perform here, then we have every reason to believe that if he stays injury-free, that he is a contender at Rio. He's around the third fastest time of the year so far this year. That's the not wind-aided time. His wind-aided time was actually the best time of the year this year. So this is a real contender. And this is a contender, if he runs the same time he ran in the NCAAs, he could beat Bolt. And that would be an incredible Canadian story right there, an incredible world story that we would own as Canadians.
That would be hard to beat. And in the same vein, if people really know me, they know what I'll be doing on July 16th. The new Velodrome in Milton track cycling competition in Pan Am Game is July 16th. I'll be there to watch all of them, to watch the points race, the Madison, to watch the Kieran, to watch the Pursuit, to watch 100 meters, to watch the 400 meters, to watch all those great competition, and I can't wait to be there for July 16th. It's going to be almost a dream of mine to attend a track cycling competition live, because I couldn't in Montreal. It was turning to a zoo before I could attend. So there you go again.
Huh. All right. It's a nice zoo, though. It is a nice zoo. But there's penguins there.
I know, and people show me pictures, Jonathan, and then other people showing me pictures of the penguins on Twitter. I don't mind. I like men and women on bicycles a lot more than I like penguins.
Yeah, and if you really want to see penguins, we have some wonderful South African penguins at the Toronto Zoo, which is a beautiful zoo that you can also visit while you're watching the Pan Am Game, or the Pan Am Games here in Toronto. I wanted to just end this with this. Sean Fitzgerald, who was a guest on this show earlier this year, wrote a column, and he's been covering a lot of the Pan Am stuff. So we talked to him about his columns back then. And Sean is a guy that I think has some hesitations about fully investing in these games. He has some concerns about the costs and things like that. So he was at the very, very first event, which is a midweek event, obviously before the opening ceremonies, before there was any hype around this. And, of course, there were like 30 people there. Now, a lot of people chose to focus on that. I think that that's ridiculous, and you need to actually look at how Olympic events that take place before the actual opening ceremonies do, and you'll see that there's not many people in the stands then either. However, he interviewed someone in the stands, and I thought that this was the perfect quote to end this. And he, said, "Are you worried about them wasting money or spending the big money on this?" And the guy said, "They're going to waste the money anyway. They're meaning the government. I'd rather waste them on this." And that's kind of where I come down on this path, as long with a side dash of, if they are going to waste the money anyway, I'd rather waste them on this. And if they're going to take place anyway, I'd rather go out and enjoy them. So that's my final message to anyone listening to this in the GTA, Ontario, anywhere that can get here. They're here now. Go out and enjoy them.
All right. Let's take a break and come back and talk about the Women's World Cup final. The Five Rings Podcast, Canada 2015 Women's World Cup edition with Dwayne Rollins and Kevin Laramie. Here's Dwayne Rollins.
And welcome back to the Five Rings Podcast. Women's World Cup edition-ish, sort of. The Women's World Cup is over now, Kevin. The month-long event here in Canada has come and gone. It seems surreal to me that it's done now. I mean, I was at the press conference when they announced that they were hosting the games, or the bid, I should say, the tournament. I'm trying to spit that out. So for me to have watched this from bid process to the awarding and then through the tournament and now it's done, it's kind of kind of sad in a way that it's over, because it's, there's so much anticipation around these events. There's always a letdown when they're done. But it's done now, and the U.S. won.
If you go back to that day that it announced that you were present, and the image and the feeling that you had about this game, do you think that vision or feeling were ever accomplished?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And don't worry, we'll get into the American side of this in a minute, folks. But in terms of legacy and whether they accomplished all they could, I mean, I had a higher expectation for the attendance than what happened. I did feel that based on what this country did for the 2007 under-20 men's event, which they filled up the stadiums pretty much across the board, regardless of who was playing. In fact, Canada was a non-factor in that tournament for the most part. They didn't score a single goal. Were eliminated in 3 games. So, they weren't the story. And they still sold that out. So I sort of anticipated it to be the same thing. But we saw sluggish sales throughout. And I was hearing stories for the years leading into it that the sales were bad, going poorly, and that the promotion was bad. And there was obviously that, the unspoken or overly spoken, depending on your perspective, no Toronto presence, no Hamilton presence either, because the stadium wasn't going to necessarily be ready in time. It turned out it was. But they didn't know that for sure, so Hamilton was off the bag, so there was no GTA presence at all, which I think really did hurt the promotion and really ultimately did hurt the tickets. Obviously, there were places that sold well. Vancouver did sell well throughout the tournament. The non-Canada games did, they didn't sell out, but they did get 25,000, 30,000 per game. I think Ottawa did really well. They were generally selling out. Winnipeg sold well. It's hard to understand how much that was Winnipeg and how much was that the 2 American games being played there, but they sold well. That said, there were some problem areas. Moncton didn't really embrace this at all, and I would say that Moncton would be my biggest disappointment, along with, of course, your hometown and just the ability to attract there, other than the Canada game and the U.S. game. It was almost a non-factor in Montreal in a lot of ways, was it not?
Outside of those games, absolutely. The buzz was there because of the teams themselves and not the tournament. And I think maybe that's... I'm not going to blame anybody, but it was really focused on Canada, the marketing and all that. Maybe you see the results of it, and the non-Canada game and non-US game, because the game against Germany, which I was present for, was almost sold out, barely 100 couple of seats empty. But there was a big atmosphere. There was a lot of Americans coming up for that game, so that would explain it. But you're right. The other games, the non-Canada, non-US games, were a disappointment when you talk about 7,000, 10,000 max that came for those games.
Yeah, and look, I think that that FIFA and CSA working together, and it's one will blame the other, and the other will blame the other, so to speak, when it comes to the attendance problems that did happen here. So you can't ever get anyone to really tell you exactly what they think. They just blame someone else. I think someone overestimated the overall draw of women's soccer in general. And I say that carefully and not meant as a bash to women's soccer. And I think I always have to explain that, because it's always want to make sure that people are hearing you correctly. But the reality is, I think we saw that without a poll, it didn't grab a hold of the attention of the Canadian public. And, was that because of what? I don't know. It's hard to say. I just think that, especially the Moncton one, that's why Moncton is more disappointing to me, because I lived out east, and like I say this with all due respect, they don't get stuff like that all the time. Like there's
not a lot of things to do in Moncton.
I mean, there are camping and outdoorsy things and things, but there's not a lot of elite sport in Moncton, is what we'll say. There's university sport, and they will go out and watch a university hockey game, fine, but they for whatever reason, couldn't fill a very small stadium. They did get some numbers in there, but it's a small stadium, and they weren't completely sold out. And to me, that should have sold out in a snap of the fingers, regardless of who was playing, because it was a World Cup, and it was taking place in Moncton, New Brunswick, which is a tiny place. I don't know how many cities in the world in men's or women's senior World Cups as small as Moncton has ever hosted an event or hosted a group, and I'm just disappointed that they just couldn't sell more, and I'm not sure why. I mean, and as a soccer guy in Canada that wants to promote and think that the sport has arrived in this country, it discourages me when I see that, because it reminds me that maybe I'm in a bubble here in Toronto and I don't see how the sport is viewed outside of that bubble.
I have to plead guilty. I'm in the same bubble. And I always disappointed when I see soccer being bashed or maybe not as popular or as talked about as I would have liked, because we're in that bubble. And for us, it's big because that's all we talk about and watch. But when you go outside that bubble, Dwayne, unfortunately, you are right. Sport has maybe arrived in the States, but has not arrived in Canada yet.
Yeah, well, it's arrived in the three Canadian major cities, I would say, and with bubbles outside. There's obviously fans all over the country, but in terms of large groups of support that can consistently draw, if you're not in Toronto and Vancouver, and I think, with all due respect to a lesser extent, Montreal will come out for a big event, but they won't necessarily come out consistently, I think is what's been proven in the past 3 or 4 years when it comes to the sport. It's a struggle. It's a struggle to get the attention. And this is where the lack of Toronto came into play. Not that Toronto would have sold the games out. I mean, bluntly, they would have, because the critical mass is here to do so. There's enough ground support that you can get 10,000 people with a snap of finger as soon as you announce, and then it would sell the rest with the amount of clubs and the amount of girls that play in this area. It wouldn't have been a problem. But the biggest issue with Toronto wasn't the fact that they were losing sold-out games. It was the fact that the major Canadian media is almost entirely located in the city, and they just weren't even cognizant of this tournament up until it was almost on top of them. And at that point, it was too late to really push it and sell it.
Yep, I have to agree with that too.
Okay, let's talk about the U.S. As well. Look, I didn't think they would win. I thought that they were on a downfall. I said that quite openly. I own that. Obviously, they proved me wrong. They won. However, I think, to defend myself a little bit, if you listen carefully to what I said, I always said there was a chance they could win. I just thought that right now the game was moving away from the type of style that they play, and it just, I think I overestimated how much the rest of the world had caught up and how much the rest of the world was able to overcome the United States' inherent athletic advantage, which is an incredible advantage that they do have. And we saw that in the final 2 games, when after a month of physical drain, that these technical players were done. They had nothing left in the tank when they faced the Americans, and the Americans are a athletic, physical powerhouse, and they just bulldozed them in the semifinals, and especially against Japan in that final.
No, I was shocked in Montreal for the semifinal, the way they played against Germany. The lineup was changed too. When Joe Ellis was able to maybe let go of feelings towards certain players, when I mean is good feelings, and realize that they're past their prime, and put players that are deserved. And we saw it coming out party in the final for Carly Lloyd, which she established herself as one of the best players in the entire world, with a golden boot, a hat trick in the World Cup final, a goal from midfield that we'll see for the next 50 years at every top whatever goals of the year. That performance is going to be remembered forever, and I think that was truly a changing of the guard, but it was because the team changed. It wasn't the same team that started that tournament that finished it, and I think at the end of the tournament they came out better, but what our analysis was focused on the way they were playing going in, and the way they were going in was totally different than going out.
Yeah, well, to speak to Jill Ellis specifically, you're right. She adjusted, and she sat Abby Wambach and used her in the role that she was best suited for, which was to come off as an impact sub. I did not believe she had that in her. I based that on how she acted, right? I was basing that on the evidence that was in front of me. But to her credit, she adjusted. I don't know whether the Americans at some point had an epiphany during the group stage, whether Abby Wambach herself maybe even had an epiphany during the group stage, realized that her fitness wasn't up to the same level of her teammates, and, sort of worked with Jill Ellis to make that happen, or whether Jill Ellis sat her down and made it happen. And, you would hope it would be a bit of both if you're an American fan, I think, to have that self-awareness, because that's one of my biggest criticisms of the United States women's national team over the years is they lack self-awareness in a lot of ways in the lead up to this. They sort of viewed themselves as victims often when they weren't necessarily victimized, and they sort of viewed themselves as the underdogs when they weren't the underdogs. They have massive advantages. One thing I do maintain my position, though, that the U.S. needs to change. They need to change how they do things if they want to win more World Cups moving forward, because I do believe that the talent gap is closing rapidly in a way that we can't comprehend as observers of the men's game. So you can't even compare the men's games to the women's game when it comes to this, because the women are rapidly catching up on the stuff that men have taken for granted for generations, right? So when you see England's performance in this tournament, and they were the revelation in a lot of ways, after that sort of tepid first game against France, who I do believe might have been the team that could have stopped the U.S. had they not had a very, very unlucky penalty call go against them against Germany. Outside of that game, England played well. They played sort of a game that was similar enough to the Americans in terms of their physical ability, but also had a technical backing that made them a very interesting and intriguing team moving forward. And I think that even if you look at the Women's Super League in England and the fact that the biggest clubs in England are starting to get behind it, you know, your Liverpools, your Cities, your Chelseas, your Arsenals, they've all have big stakes in the women's game now. Financial fair play now allows for the women's investment to not be counted as loss, so there's no reason to not invest in the women's side. I think that England's only going to grow bigger because of that league, and it's ultimately, I think France, as I said, got a little unlucky, and they're going to get better. So the U.S., if they want to maintain their position as the best women's team in the world, and they are, consistently have been for 20 years, then they need to be focusing more on their technical aspects, and they need to also take care of their league and make sure that it remains stable for the next 4 years, because over the last decade, that's been the biggest problem in American women's soccer, is the stability of their professional league.
Let's move to Canada for just a small second, Dwayne. I'll mention you the comment of Victor Montigliani, which he said, I think that the impact and not necessarily the legacy, but with the presence of the quarterfinals, they achieved something, but I think it's not enough to call it a success. Would you agree with that?
Okay, I understand what he's saying. I think that I am the wrong person to ask in many ways whether Canada's Women's World Cup was a success, because I watched them so very closely and had such, in my mind, such a clear understanding of what they were capable of. And to me, they reached the standard of what they were capable of. They did not exceed it. So I guess what he's saying then is that in order for this World Cup to be called an unqualified success, they needed to exceed their expectations, and that's perhaps fair. But I wouldn't call it a failure either, because the quarterfinals did engage the nation. It did. They played 5 games in this World Cup. Each game grew in attention and interest and all that. They did get the big win against Switzerland, which undoubtedly was something that inspired the country. They did get into a game against England where, even though they fell behind, they did fight back to get the goal to make it 2-1, and then, you know, maybe we're on the upper foot for a while. So I think that a lot of Canadians viewed that as a noble loss, even though that they fell behind, that they felt that maybe they deserved a little better in that game. So I don't think that they put the game back or hurt the game in any way. I wouldn't call this a failure. I just would call it a mission exactly completed the way that it probably would have been 9 times out of 10, if you know what I mean. Like, they did exactly what they were capable of.
You're saying that there was a simulation of the computer for like 1,000 times over this tournament, Canada would probably finish in the same position about 900 times.
Yeah, exactly. You know, not to get into my 1% again, but that's. I think that you know, they would have made the semifinals a significant amount of those times, but they wouldn't have got much further very often. They would have been eliminated in the round of 16 occasionally, but it still would have been in the minority. The quarterfinals was always the most likely place they were going to finish based on their draw and based on their play and based on their ranking headed in. They finished exactly where their ranking was. So what more can you really say to that?
What more will you take away from the tournament? What I take away is, yes, it was a soccer tournament, a big FIFA tournament, probably the biggest soccer tournament ever held in Canada. Maybe the U17 was bigger, but it was a big. It helped grow the sport, but it was not the be all end all that would make the sport arrive that I think people thought it would be.
No, I mean, what is it the impetus towards? We're talking in another podcast about the launching of the Canadian Men's League in the near future. A lot of people have asked me whether there should be a women's league launched instead, and I wrote an article on CanadianSoccerNews.com last night, which sort of spells out why I don't think that that's necessarily prudent at this particular time. And I don't think the Women's World Cup could have done much to really make that prudent, right? Mm-hmm. But what it did do, I think, is it illustrated that Canadians will get behind a winning soccer team, and the Canadians will go out and cheer for their own team so long as they're provided with a reason to do so. In essence, it proved that we can be bandwagoners when it comes to this sport. I've seen games involving the Canadian women in very recent history where there were less than 5,000 people in the stands, in a 25,000-seat stadium. So let's not pretend this is a long-term thing that's happening right now, but it did sustain the interest from London to sell out stadiums from now. So this team is on the consciousness of the Canadian sporting community. It's viewed as better than it is amongst most people, and that's okay, because when you're trying to sell the game, you want to sell that hope. I think as long as those of us on the technical aspect, those of us on the sports-specific side of things understand where the team's real standing is and continue to work to make it better, then it's no problem that my mom thinks that they're a world elite team, even though they're probably not. But I think it's imperative now, Kevin, that the CSA get this team. Like the U.S. is doing a victory lap, basically. They do this after every Olympics and World Cup. They basically send their women out on like a barnstorming tour where they make money for the federation and helps to pay the bills for the next couple of years, right? The CSA needs to do the same thing with the women. They need to go all around the country this fall. They need to play in every city that had a game. They need to sell that game out. They need to also come into Toronto again, obviously, and sell tickets out here and use that revenue to help raise the women's game up more. That needs to happen now. And I think that the popularity of the women during this event, and they do have obviously the Olympics to build towards as well, shows to me that they can sell those tickets and they can make that kind of money that they can then use to make the program better. And that provides me with some hope that they can, as long as they follow through on that capability, that opportunity.
Seems like a good idea, actually, because they are on a victory tour. They were in LA, they're on the way to New York, the women's national team in the United States, and they will make it around and play exhibition game, and like you say, just gather fund basically for the program to maintain the standards that they're used to. And let's not get this wrong. The United States have the best infrastructures, maybe not development-wise, but if you're looking about training facilities, nutrition, and all those people surrounding them, it does help them maintain the level of fitness that they do have.
Yeah, and do I think that it's necessarily the case the United States is going to drop off and not be the woman's power anymore? I think it's possible. And I think there's a lot of Americans that don't think it's possible, but I think that they need to look a little closely at that and evaluate the reality of it. Like, if we had a conversation about the men's game in 1959, it probably would have been unimaginable that Hungary would no longer be a world power. Hungary is, along the lines of Canada now in the men's game, right? And they were amongst the very best elite teams in the world in the 50s. So things can change if you don't evolve. And I think it's just at a crossroads now, the women's game, that the American women need to evolve if they're going to maintain their position. They're more than capable of it. There is so much resources in that country when it comes to the women's game. I've said this before, I'll say it again. If the U.S. fully realizes its potential, it should win every World Cup, and there's nothing to say it can't do that moving forward, but it does need to evolve. All right, let's take a break, come back. We'll have a little talk about the Tour de France and Wimbledon.
Kevin talks about cycling on the Five Rings podcast.
Tour de France.
And welcome back. Kevin Talk Cycling. Kevin, talk cycling. What's happening in the Tour de France right now?
A lot today. The stage that finished took an hour and a half ago. Tony Martin, the leader of the Tour de France, who got the yellow jersey with a single solo victory on the cobbles, well, he crashed and probably out of the Tour de France. It was inside the 3 kilometers of the finish, so he has the same time as everybody else. But he might have broken his collarbone, so he might have crashed out of the Tour, which would be the second time this year a yellow jersey owner, you could say, crashed out of the Tour. Cancellara, a couple days ago, was in the lead. Again, the Tour de France crashed out, broke his collarbone, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So he'd be the second crashed out of the Tour de France. It seems like the yellow jersey's been cursed in 2015. The second in the general classification right now is Chris Froome, one of the perennial contender for the final yellow jersey this year. Well, he might take over the lead if tomorrow Tony Martin from Ethics Quick Step team cannot start.
Interesting. So, what if he can't start? It just goes to the person who's in second place.
Yeah, exactly. And it would be Chris Froome. But the way he fell today was just he hit a wheel in the bunch. There was a small false flat coming up. There was actually a climb at 1.7 kilometer to go. It was about maybe a 400-meter climb, not too hard. But in that climb, he touched the wheel, lost balance, and fell. Not at great speed at all, but when you fall at slow speed, you fall directly on your collarbone and you don't slide. So it's actually a bigger impact on your bone than it would be if you would just slide.
Yeah, well, my understanding of like anyone who's just played sports knows how you can break a collarbone. Even if you fall and like brace your fall, the impact can go through your arm and snap it that way too. Like you can understand, like just a direct fall straight down. It's probably the most dangerous way for your collarbone, right?
Exactly, and the way they're on their bike, the position they are when they fall over with their feet attached to the pedal, if they cannot unattached in time, well, they will land directly on their shoulders, and it's probably the worst spot, and it's the most common injury in cycling is a collarbone.
Yeah, I would have assumed as well. We're fairly early in the race now. To just talk about what the strategy and what the top contenders would be for the back half of this race.
Top contenders is Chris Froome, Contador going for the double. He won the Giro last month. Obviously, as well, Vincenzo Nibali, last year's winner, who actually fell at the same time. When Tony Martin fell, he fell on Nibali, but Nibali looked fine, did not look injured at all, which unfortunately is not the case for Tony Martin. But you have Nibali. Nairo Quintana from Movistar might be a contender, but he's an outside dark horse. I would favor Froome in front of Contador, and depending on Nibali's form, he's not up to the level of a Contador and Froome, but Contador is tired with the Giro, and Froome last year, he crashed out of the Tour, so he did not contend and will not fight with Nibali on the slopes of the mountains of the Tour de France. This year they will be. So it's between those three, but if Contador could win the Tour de France after winning the Giro d'Italia in a changed peloton where there's a lot stricter doping measure, it would, I wouldn't say a redeeming factor in his career, but it would be a big coup that not a lot of people, if ever, achieved in their lives.
Talk about Contador a little bit. What his race has been like so far.
So far, he's been quiet. His team's been able to surround him. Yes, there's a Peter Sagan in his team where he likes to go for himself, but so far he's been able to protect Contador when it's time, and his personal ambition doesn't go higher in the priority than the team's ambition of winning the whole thing with Contador. So there was always that in mind. So far, it's been a low-profile beginning of the race for Contador, and that's what you want. You want him to rest as long as possible, keep those energy in the tank, so when he has to attack on the slopes of those mountains, he would have more energy, because not just him, but 5 of his teammates from the Giro are in the same team this year, so 6 out of 9 are doing the double. That's a lot of kilometers in your legs, and that's a lot of energy, not wasted, but a lot of energy left on the road. So it's going to be interesting to see in the hot days of the mid-July in the Pyrenees and the Alps if him and his team can keep up with the rest of the field.
It's interesting. Yeah, you don't think about that, but I would imagine that in some ways that the team's legs, because those guys aren't as high level of athletes either. I mean, they're still high athletes, but you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, they're not quite these elite.
They don't have, usually, they're called domestique. They still can win in any other day, can win one race, but they're not necessarily consistent over a 3-week period and don't necessarily have the capacities to rival on the mountains to the big guns.
Yeah, so if they're not there to protect him, then that's going to make his effort even more difficult. To end it, I want to move away real quickly because we did talk about the Pan Ams in this game, Kevin. Just as a general question, I'm not going to ask you to specifically name athletes here, but what would the quality of the cycling field, the road race field, be in a Pan Am game, something like that? Can you speak to that?
Because it's a Pan-American game, you don't have the biggest nations of cycling because they're all from Europe. But there's a lot of great cycling athletes coming from Canada, the United States the last couple of years, and a lot from South America. If you like countries like Colombia, other countries that have a lot of mountains, have produced a lot of great cycling on the track and on the road in the last couple of years. And you will see those athletes in the Pan Am Games. All the track cycling from North America, it's one of the big races. You don't have a lot of race in the calendar year, especially in North America. So that Toronto date of July 16 has been cycled on their calendar for a long time. So it's going to be a great day in Milton for that competition and on the road a couple days after as well.
Bottom line is it's still, it may not be the Tour de France, but it's still going to be a hell of a race for people to watch, right?
Olympic level, close, almost Olympic level outside of a couple of European nations like Great Britain, France, that are really good on track, but they're mainly Great Britain and that part of Europe are not there to compete in those games. That's the biggest difference. But still, outside of Europe, the best cycling nation in the last couple of years have been in North America and America in general. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's a great level of competition, close to the Olympic level. It's going to be, to the eye, you won't see the difference.
All right. Let's move on and wrap this conversation up, wrap this show up with a little bit of tennis talk. We'll wrap Wimbledon up a lot more in next week's regular show. We'll do, of course, regular Pan Am shows throughout this, but we'll do a regular show as well, just like we did during the Commonwealth Games last summer. What is your overall take on the Wimbledon bid this year, Kevin? Are you enjoying it?
Yes, it's been a different Wimbledon where Nadal's been booted out early by a great performance by a young player. Both Canadian favorites have been booted out early. One because he's recovering from injury and couldn't keep up. The other one, she can't find herself, so she's been eliminated quite easily. But there's a new Canadian that decided to take the spotlight, Vasek Pospisil, with a road to the quarterfinal. He lost to Andy Murray, so he lost to a very good tennis player, former number one in the world. And as well, he lost in a way that he created great moment. On a one day, he came back to win a round of 16 game. And then came back to win a doubles game. 10 cents of playing in one day for him. It was a great performance. It shows the fitness level he's in for a young player. Still, he has a great career. And usually he's in the shadows of Bouchard and Raonic. But now, this year in Wimbledon, Pospisil announced himself.
Yeah, and you know what? I said this the other day on Twitter to make this Canadian-centric for a second. We are Canadian, so we're allowed. I believe that on most given days that Raonic is the better player, clearly. He's a higher-ranked player. He's had tournament wins, so on and so forth. His big serve is a weapon that, and when it's on, can't be stopped by all the very elite. But I do actually think that possible hard name to say, has a possible, yeah, I can't talk today. Anyway, that has the better chance of upsetting one of those top players because he kind of has a more complete game than Milos. If you could combine those two names, you'd really be rocking.
Milos Pospisil?
Yeah.
Or Vasek Raonic?
Yeah, the two of them. Yeah, if you combine them, you would have an amazing player, is what I'm saying. But I think that Raonic is, his game really suffers against the top two players because they know how to deal with his serve. And once you figure his serve out, he kind of doesn't have enough of a return game. Moving on to the Davis Cup, which is starting next week, I think that Milos is out of it. But when you put him in, when you put Vasquez into it, that it really does, because it's his double single sort of combination, give Canada a really good chance to get that result against Serbia. There's just a lot of great stories in Canadian tennis. Jeannie has been the one that we've been focusing on a little bit because of her struggles, and that's unfortunate and very Canadian of us to focus on the one struggling. Milos has had some problems with his injuries this year. He had to pull out of the Davis Cup because his foot's just not fully recovered, and he just didn't look completely himself at Wimbledon. He did get to the third round, but I think on a better day, if he was fully healthy and fully fit, that he might have gotten a little bit further. So, it hasn't been quite the glorious year that last year was in Canadian tennis, but I think that we shouldn't hold our head down. It's been a decent year.
No, absolutely. And in Davis Cup, you'll see Pospisil with Daniel Nestor for this year at least. Daniel Nestor coming to the end of his career, but he's still having fun in the doubles game. And him and Pospisil have a very good relationship on the court, where Nestor is the mentor in a way, and Pospisil is the young gun trying to get all the knowledge possible squeezed out of Nestor with the short amount of opportunity he gets to play with him. So that's interesting in that way. And Nestor has a storied career in the doubles, probably one of the greatest ever in the doubles tournaments, countless Grand Slam, countless Olympic, well, not countless Olympic medals, but some Olympic medals. So it's a great combination, and it's always great for the Davis Cup. But there's a big gap between Pospisil, Raonic, and the rest in the singles run. So if Raonic is not there, you get a very difficult single game in those tournaments that can cost you a point usually. And in a best 3 out of 5 format in a weekend competition, 1 point means a lot. So it's going to be interesting to see if Canada can squeeze it out and continue, to start the run, even if Raonic is injured.
Yeah, I mean, they'll have a chance to remain in the world group for next year. I do think that if Canada gets a good run, gets a good draw like it did a couple of years ago, that it could go deep in a Davis Cup because of that doubles combination. They have great doubles players as well as, Milos is a guy that can get that 1 point up against all but the very elite teams. Most times you've got a guy in your number 2 there when you're fully healthy that can pull an upset off here and there. So it is a very good Davis Cup team Canada has, and I think that those guys, especially the doubles, will have, it's why Nestor's sticking around, I'm pretty sure, is to get through Rio, because he looks at the possibility of maybe getting another gold medal there, and I would have to think that's going to be one of Canada's best gold medal hopes next year at the Olympics. But right now, there's not going to be a Wimbledon title this year for any Canadians because they're all out, but we are going to enjoy the weekend. I'm looking forward to that Federer-Murray match on Friday. That is going to be one hell of a tennis game.
Absolutely, and we'll see Djokovic is not as dominating this year as he was last year. So there's always that as well. So maybe it's the year Federer finally gets that elusive Wimbledon, final Wimbledon victory to surpass Pete.
Yeah, and he continues to amaze me. He was in our, when we gave our 5 Rings Awards out last year, he was on the short list for our Athlete of the Year, and for very good reason, because he's just a freak of nature at this point in his career. Wimbledon has been, I'll end with this, it has been an incredible performance. Those top guys are really performing. The way that Murray played in the quarters yesterday was outrageous. Like, on any other given day, Vasco could win that game. He played so well. He served so well. He was hitting great ground strokes, getting to the net very well, but Murray is just on a different planet at this point, and it spoke to me what that gap is between the top 4 and the rest is still immense. And I continue to think that one day Father Time's going to take care of it, but we've been saying that for a couple of years now, and I'm just not sure when Father Time's going to knock those guys down.
Yep, at least in Roger Federer's point of view, Father Time is still eluded him for some reason. The other ones are catching up, like you say. And Nadal, for some reason, maybe because he put his body through worst attrition just because of his style of play. He hasn't been the same last couple of years because of injury, and it would explain his recent performances as well. But outside of him, he's probably out of the top 4. Now you have Federer, Djokovic, Murray, and depending on the day, you have to include Wawrinka in there. So those are very interesting.
Yeah, and we will continue to watch this week, and we'll wrap that up. As we said, the Pan Am Games, they get underway tomorrow. Kevin and I will work the schedule out, but you can expect your gold, silver, bronze, wood medal shows throughout these games. I think in Sochi we got, of the 15 days or 17 days of a competition, I think we got 15 shows out. So that's a lot of pressure there, Kevin, but we know how to, we do one thing well. We are the gold medalists of recording podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. We're hard to beat.
All right. Say goodbye for the day. I'll let you do that as always.
All right, so until next week, if for any info on the technical issues we're having right now, just go to our Twitter handles at 24th Minute, at Kev Larme for any updates. Right now, you can all get the shows on fiveringspodcast.com, usradio.com, Canadian Soccer News, kevinlarme.com, YouTube, and until next time, own your podium and enjoy the Pan Am Games.